Hare Krishna. So, welcome everyone. So, today we have the last lesson for the first canto. Today we will study chapters 18 and 19. So, we will conclude the first canto. And the first canto it finishes exactly at the moment that Sukadeva Goswami comes and prepares to speak. And the second canto, right, the first verse of second canto is already Sukadeva Goswami speaking. So, let's see the first slide. So, so as long as Maharaj Parikshit was on the planet, there was no chance Kali could flourish because he was such a powerful and saintly king. However, at the same time, the Kali Yuga is part of the cosmic order. So the degradation of Kali Yuga creates an opportunity for the most degraded souls, like also known as us, the most degraded souls that don't have enough pious merits, to take birth in other eras, to take birth in this planet and having the opportunity of receiving the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's said that in the Bhagavatam that souls, pious souls from other eras, they want to take birth in Kali Yuga, but it's not always possible because that's not the time for them, right? That's the time for us. Sometimes they can, sometimes it doesn't work. So another factor is that Parikshit was Krishna's pure devotee, right? And Krishna wanted him back. So we often think that living a long life, is a blessing, right? But it's not exactly true for a pure devotee, because a long life means staying more time in this material, in this world. And for a pure devotee, that's not exactly good news, right? So Krishna allows his pure devotees to stay for some time amongst us, right? To give us association, but this is limited offer, right? They stay for only for a limited time because pure devotees they don't belong to this world. So eventually Krishna takes them back. So to reconcile all these different factors, Krishna organized this pastime of Maharaja Parikshit being cursed by a Brahmana boy and thus renouncing the kingdom, going to the banks of the Ganges or the Yamuna. And this led to his meeting with Sukadeva Goswami and the descent of the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Which is the lighthouse, right? That can guide all the fallen souls of Kali Yuga back to Godhead, right? So that's our opportunity to go back to Godhead. So the death of Maharaja Parikshit was thus a pastime organized by Krishna to fulfill many different purposes. So one, Maharaj Parikshit, to bring Maharaj Parikshit back to Godhead. Two, to allow Kali to momentarily spread his influence, like, and pave the way for the appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Three, to create the conditions for the meeting of Parikshit and Sukadeva Goswami, and in this way for the descent of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And four, creating the opportunity for Maharaja Parikshit, giving us the perfect example of how to live this world. Right? So there are at least four different reasons for this pastime. And then, okay, now we are going to speak about the auspicious age of Kali. Maybe you never thought about that, right? That Kali Yuga is an auspicious age, but actually it is. So, verse 7 of the 18th chapter, it describes the point that despite all faults, Kali Yuga is actually a very auspicious opportunity for practicing spiritual life. And the verse reads that, quote, Maharaja Parikshit, he was a realist, like the bees who only accept the essence of a flower. He knew perfectly well that in this age of Kali, auspicious things produce good effects immediately, whereas inauspicious acts must be actually performed to render effects. So he was never envious of the personality of Kali, right? This we studied last time, right? That in Kali Yuga we have this advantage, right? Whatever we think like that is positive, it creates effects immediately. And whatever we think that is sinful, it doesn't act unless we physically do, do the act, right? So we are not, it's not expected for us that we have the same mental control that people from other eras. As long as we can refrain from, doing gross sinful acts, we are okay. Right? So we may be attracted, right, to the Vedic societies of the past, but the reality is that with our level of qualification, we will not be accepted on these societies. So even if we will take birth, in in Treta Yuga or Dwapara Yuga, we will not be accepted in this Vedic society. We won't be outcasts. We won't be forced to live in the forests because they will not accept us. Right? So Kali Yuga the opportunity for us to take birth and get in contact with Krishna consciousness. And not only do we have access to the most powerful process of self-realization, right, the chanting of the holy names, but we also have access to the conclusion of all the Vedic scriptures, that is the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? And the commentaries of Srila Prabhupada make this knowledge even more accessible for us, right? In previous eras, previous ages, only people not only people they had the trouble of following very complicated and comparatively ineffective processes of self-realization or meditating for 100,000 years, but the knowledge of the scriptures would also not be so available. It was not so easy for them to get this knowledge about devotional service that we have access to. And another advantage that we have is that, that's the point that I already mentioned, is that we are not punished by our mental sins, right? In previous eras, people, they would become degraded by just thinking about some sinful action. While in Kali Yuga, we only degrade themselves by effectively doing it, right? So our minds may be disturbed and go here and there, but as long as we can refrain from physically doing sinful actions, as long as we can at least control our actions, we don't become implicated, we don't become degraded. On the opposite, right? Just by thinking about doing some service or some auspicious activity, we get benefits. So it's the opposite than in previous years. So in this way, even the most, lethargic people, they can advance just by having a desire to serve Krishna, even if they are not getting up of the bed, but if at least they have this idea that, oh, I wish I went to Mangalartik today. I wish I would be, washing pots for Krishna or whatever. Still, they get advancement just from that, just for desiring to do something, even if they're just sleeping the whole day. It's quite amazing, right? So another point is that Kali can remain only in places where there is meat-eating, illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, and also accumulation of wealth. Therefore, by carefully avoiding these activities, like strictly following the four principles, we can remain aloof, right, from his influence. And we can see that the process of Krishna consciousness was carefully created to give us the best opportunity of going back to Godhead, right? So by following the four principles, daily chanting, our rounds, offering food to Krishna, studying the scriptures, worshiping the deities, going to the temple, etc., we enjoy all the benefits of the age of Kali, while at the same time avoiding its negative sides. So no, it's actually a very advantageous time, this age of Kali. Like I said, people from previous eras, they desire to take birth in Kali Yuga because there is such a huge opportunity. So the age of Kali is a great opportunity for us, and it's like specially made for to address our deficiencies. Like we will not be able to live in such a yuga, Treta Yuga, or even Dwapara Yuga, but due to the mercy of the Lord, we have the best of opportunity, right, to escape the cycle of birth and death right now, right? And then on verse 8, Sutta Goswami, he concludes, Maharaja Parikshit considered that less intelligent men might find the personality of Kali to be very powerful, but that those who are self-controlled won't have nothing to fear. The king was powerful like a tiger and took care of the foolish, careless persons, right? So the king was taking care, right? And then the sages want to hear more, right? Okay, so with this, Sutta Goswami, he finished his descriptions of the activities of Maharaja Parikshit, right? However, it finishes on verse 8 of 18th chapter. However, the sages, of course, they wanted to hear more, because these sages, they had come to Naimisharanya to execute a 1,000-year sacrifice, right? That's mentioned in the first canto. But now they were unsure about the results of this sacrifice, because there were so many imperfections on the execution, and their bodies became covered by smoke, and so many difficulties. But they found something of real value in this narration of the Srimad Bhagavatam by Sutta Goswami. So they were very deeply pleased with the sage, and they said to him that, quote, "The value of a moment's association with the devotee of the Lord cannot even be compared to the attainment of the heavenly planets or liberation from matter. And what to speak of worldly benedictions in the form of material prosperity, which are for those who are meant for that." The personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, Govinda, is the exclusive shelter for all great living beings, and his transcendental attributes cannot even be measured by such masters of mystic powers as Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. Can anyone who is expert in relishing nectar, rasa, ever be fully satisfied by hearing topics about him? Oh, Sutta Goswami, you are a learned and pure devotee of the Lord, because the personality of Godhead is your chief object of service, right? Is your main object of service. Therefore, please describe to us the pastimes of the Lord, which are above all material conception, for we are anxious to receive such messages. And this long passage is from verse 1813 to 1815. And so the sages make this long verse, this long glorification, and in particular, they want to hear how Parikshit Maharaja, he attained perfection after hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami, right? How is that he could go back to Godhead and attain perfection in devotional service? What was the process that he followed? What happened? So, at the beginning of the fourth chapter, right, before in the beginning of the first canto, the sages of Naimisharanya, they asked 5 questions to Sukadeva Goswami. And then in the following chapters, the first 3 questions were answered. So, when and how did Vyasadeva compile the Srimad Bhagavatam? How and why did Sukadeva Goswami became interested in studying the Srimad Bhagavatam? And why did he spend time describing it to Parikshit, although he was a king, right? Was like a worldly person. So these 3 questions, they were explained already in the past chapters. And now in chapters 18 and 19, the remaining 2 questions will be finally answered. So the 2 questions are, why did Parikshit renounce everything, right, to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam and fast until death? Right? It's not common that you see a king or a president doing that, right? Imagine Joe Biden one day announces, "Oh, I'm going to fast for 7 days, and now I just want to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. Now you stay with your politics. I don't want anymore," right? It won't be news like all over the world. So it's not common that a king or a president does like that. But Parikshit Maharaja did. So how is that he decided to renounce everything and fast until death? And he was just hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. Because even if he was detached, how could he abandon his duty as a king, right? And second question is, how was Sukadeva Goswami recognized as the qualified speaker by the king and the sages who assembled around him? So these are the 2 questions that will be answered today. And the next topic is that the Srimad Bhagavatam can purify anyone, and everyone, right? So Sutta Goswami, he starts, right, answering these questions by describing the effects of transcendental knowledge in his own life. Because although he was born in a mixed caste, like a birth not as exalted as most of the sages who were present in the assembly, he was promoted by hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami. And now, by speaking the Bhagavatam to the sages, he was having yet another opportunity for purification, right? So in his purport to 1818, Prabhupada explains that this is the process for all of us, right? All the contaminations of low birth and a sinful past can be washed off if one becomes conversant, like one becomes like familiar with the spiritual science of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And one may be even accepted as a guru or an acharya or whatever. So okay, I'll quote. Sutta Goswami did not take his birth in a Brahmana family. He was born in a family of mixed caste, right? This is Prabhupada speaking, or an uncultured low family. But because of higher association, like Sukadeva Goswami and the great rishis of Naimisharanya, certainly the disqualification of inferior birth was washed off. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu followed this principle in pursuance of the Vedic usages, right? Like following the Vedas. And by his transcendental association, he elevated many low-born or those disqualified by birth or action to the status of devotional service and established them in the position of acharyas or authorities, right? So he clearly stated that any man, whatever he may be, whether a Brahmana or Shudra by birth, or a householder or mendicant in the order of society, if he is conversant with the science of Krishna, he can be accepted as an acharya or guru, a spiritual master. And it's interesting that Prabhupada says any man here in the sense of human being, that is common in English language. So you say any man means any person. And nowadays, there is a lot of discussion about whether women can become spiritual masters or not, for example. And this, it go on. There are so many discussions based on sociological factors and other arguments. But when we speak about the philosophy, like the philosophy of Mahaprabhu, the conclusion is very clear. It's not about birth. It's about one's spiritual qualification, right? And this Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says on 8, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya 8, 128. He says that whether one is a Brahmana, a sannyasi, or a Shudra, regardless of what he is, he can become a spiritual master if he knows the science of Krishna, right? So this is the point. That's the qualification. So, okay, so Sutta Goswami, then he prepares to describe the final parts of the pastimes of Maharaja Parikshit, including his renunciation and his meeting with Sukadeva Goswami, right? Events that will lead us to all the other topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? The whole Bhagavatam starts from there. And then there is another quote here, 1823. O rishis who are as powerful as and powerfully pure as the sun, I shall try to describe to you the transcendental pastimes of Vishnu as far as my knowledge is concerned. As the birds fly in the sky, as far as their capacity allows, so the learned devotees describe the Lord as far as their realization allows, right? And then next topic, Parikshit offends Shamika Rishi, right? Okay, that's interesting. So how did this happen? How Maharaj Parikshit, such a pure devotee, saintly king, can become angry and offend another pure devotee, another great sage, right? So how is that? So the pastime of Maharaja Parikshit, renouncing his kingdom, right, here in the Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami and going back to Godhead, it starts with him hunting in the forest. And it may sound strange to hear about a pure devotee going to the forest to kill animals, right? Like we don't do like this normally, right? But this was actually one of the duties of kshatriyas. So apart from people living in villages, there were many sages living in the forest. Sorry. And thus, one of the responsibilities of the Kshatras was to hunt down dangerous animals such as lions and tigers and so on, and check their populations, right? Reducing the risk for the people. So these hunting excursions also served as an opportunity for the warriors to perfect their military skills, to practice by hunting, stags and other animals. And this was also connected with their duties as kshatras. So for kshatras, this is normal. This is part of their duties, right? So while hunting, Parikshit Maharaja, he became extremely thirsty. And this led him to go to the hermitage of the great sage Shamika Rishi. Sorry. To the hermitage of this Shamika Rishi. And he went there expecting to get some water from him. So, okay, so this is narrated on verses 18:24 to 26. Quote, once upon a time, Maharaja Parikshit, while engaged in hunting in the forest with bow and arrows, became extremely fatigued, hungry and thirsty while following the stags, like the deer. While searching for a reservoir of water, he entered the hermitage of the well-known Shamika Rishi and saw the sage sitting silently with closed eyes. The Muni's sense organs, breath, mind, and intelligence were all restrained from material activities, and he was situated in a trance apart from the three stages of wakefulness, dream, and unconsciousness, having achieved a transcendental position qualitatively equal with the Supreme Absolute, right? And this is Srimad Bhagavatam 1:18:24 to 26. Okay, so Shamika Rishi was in deep meditation, right? And when Parikshit arrived, he didn't hear. He couldn't hear, right? So normally, a sage won't offer a reception to a saintly king, uh, speak some nice words, offer him a place to sit, some water to drink, these basic things. But being absorbed in samadhi, right? Samika Rishi, he was not aware of what was happening around. So, and he was not able to do so. So even though Parikshit asked for water repeatedly, the sage simply didn't answer. And the king, he thought that the sage was just pretending to be in samadhi just to avoid receiving him, right? Because Parikshit, by social position, he was inferior. He was a kshatriya, and the rishi was a brahmana. So he felt like humiliated. So therefore, to reciprocate this cold reception, Maharaj Parikshit, he used his bow to collect a dead snake and put around the neck of the sage like a garland, right? You can see here on the picture, right? And as Prabhupada mentions that by the will of the Lord, the king, while going away, found a dead snake in front of him, and he thought that the sage who had coldly received him thus might be coldly rewarded by being offered a garland of a dead snake, right? Okay, unquote. So, in his purport, Prabhupada comments that becoming angry at this situation when he needed water, so badly and was not able to get it because of the negligence of the sage, it was not unnatural, right? Even for a great devotee like Maharaj Parikshit. That's normal. So what was astonishing, right, was that he was not able to control his anger. For him to feel anger is normal, but to not be able to control this anger, right, and become disturbed to the point of disrespecting a brahmana, right, this was unusual, right? So Parikshit, he had already demonstrated his tolerance by being able to tolerate the heat of the Brahmastra of Aswatthama when he was still in the womb, right? So you can't compare, the pain of, being burned by an atomic weapon to the pain of just being thirsty, right? So this is astonishing that Maharaj Parikshit he became so disturbed to the point of disrespecting a Brahmana. And Prabhupada concludes that this all happened under the supreme will of the Lord. It was an arrangement by Krishna, because the Lord was present both inside the heart of the sage and on the heart of the king, right? And thus he inspired both to act in this way, in a way that would lead to the revelation of the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? In a way that would make the pastime happens. And Prabhupada mentions this in his purport to 1828. So Prabhupada says that, quote, "So it must be accepted that it was so ordained by the supreme will of the Lord. The king was a great devotee of the Lord, and the saint was also as good as the king. But by the will of the Lord, the circumstances were so created that they became ways to the king becoming unattached to family connection and governmental activities, and thus becoming completely surrendered soul unto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. The merciful Lord sometimes creates such awkward positions for his devotees in order to drag them towards himself from the mire of material existence." Right, so see, that's arrangement of Krishna. And the meeting of Parikshit and the sage is better described in verses 27 to 30. I will read, quote, "The sage in meditation was covered by the skin of a stag, and long compressed hair was scattered all over him. The king, whose palate was dry from thirst, asked him for water. The king, not received by any formal welcome by means of being offered a seat, place, water, and sweet addresses, considered himself neglected, and so thinking, he became angry. O Brahmanas, the circumstances having distressed him with extreme hunger and thirst, the king directed toward the sage his anger and envy, which he had never before directed toward the Brahmana. While leaving, the king, being so insulted, picked up a lifeless snake with his bow and angrily placed it on the shoulder of the sage. He then returned to his palace." Right? Unquote. So Parikshit, he did that by inspiration of Krishna. However, being a Vaishnava, Parikshit, very soon he started to regret his actions, right? So as soon as this momentary anger passed, he started to contemplate if the sage was not actually in deep meditation, right? And Prabhupada mentions, that's a very important point. He says that repentance comes in the mind of a good soul as soon as he commits something wrong, right? So both Srila Visvanatha Chakravarti Thakura and Srila Jiva Goswami, they agree that these actions of Parikshit Maharaja, they were not due to the influence of karma, because he was a pure devotee, so he was above that. So they both agree that this was arranged by the Lord to bring him back to Godhead. And Prabhupada explains these points more thoroughly, in more details, in his purports to verses 24 and 25. So I will read this purport. Quote, "Maharaj Parikshit was a pure devotee of the Lord, and there was no reason for him to become extremely fatigued, hungry, and thirsty, because the devotee of the Lord never becomes perturbed by such bodily demands. But by the desire of the Lord, even such a devotee can become apparently fatigued and thirsty, just to create a situation favorable for his renunciation of worldly activities. One has to give up all attachment for worldly relations before one is able to go back to Godhead. And thus, when a devotee is too much absorbed in worldly affairs, the Lord creates a situation to cause indifference, right? To make him indifferent. The Supreme Lord never forgets his pure devotee, even though he may be engaged in so-called worldly affairs. Sometimes he creates an awkward situation, and the devotee becomes obliged to renounce all worldly affairs. The devotee can understand by the signal of the Lord, but others take it to be unfavorable and frustrating. Maharaj Parikshit was to become the medium for the revelation of Srimad Bhagavatam by Lord Sri Krishna, as his grandfather Arjuna was the medium for the Bhagavad Gita. Had Arjuna not been taken up with an illusion of family affection by the will of the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita would not have been spoken by the Lord himself for the good of all concerned. Similarly, had Maharaj Parikshit not been fatigued, hungry, and thirsty at this time, Srimad Bhagavatam would not have been spoken by Srila Sukadeva Goswami, the prime authority of Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Jai. So here, Prabhupada makes the point that pure devotees, they are sometimes putting apparent illusion by the Lord, right? To fulfill some higher purpose. This is, however, not the same type of illusion that we are subject to, because it's not disconnected from the Lord, right? So in this case, the pure devotee is just acting under the direction of the Lord, the dictation of the Lord, surrendered to him. He's just doing what the Lord inspires him to do. And the so-called illusion, right, that affects then in this case, happens under the spiritual potency, under Yoga Maya, and not as just material conditioning, like in your case. Okay, so now next topic. The downfall of the Brahmana class. That's another topic described in this chapter. So the catalyst for the renunciation of Maharaj Parikshit was the curse of Shringi, right? The son of the sage. And he cursed Maharaj Parikshit to die in 7 days, bitten by this winged snake, after hearing that he had disrespected his father. So, despite his young age, right, this Shringi, he had been trained his father as a brahmachari, and thus he was already powerful as a qualified brahmana, right? So Prabhupada mentions that this was a testament to the good government of the king, actually. Because he managed the world so well that even a child, playing with other boys, he was already so powerful that he could curse a king like Maharaj Parikshit, right? So, however, under the influence of Kali Yuga, this power was misused by this boy, right? He was mixed with pride, and this led him to ignorantly cursing the king, right? So this was the beginning of the downfall of the Brahminical order. Prabhupada mentions this point that he says, quote, hatred of the lower orders of life began from this Brahmana boy under the influence of Kali, and thus cultural life began to dwindle day after day. Under the influence of the age of Kali, Brahmanas became proud, and this led them to lose their powers and Brahminical culture, and eventually create the caste system, which is a demoniac system, right? So the caste system, in turn, it led to the abolition of the Varnashrama system, right? And the establishment of the democratic systems. And democracy is also not an ideal form of government. So Prabhupada, he makes the point that one should remove the deviations from the Varnashrama system. He should, correct the system. Instead of just, rejecting the system as a whole, because Varnashrama is important for the organization of society. So Prabhupada mentions that in the Varaha Purana, it's mentioned that demons who acted like inimically toward the Lord when he was present, they were killed by him, and were not killed by him, right? These demons, they were allowed to take birth in the families of Brahmanas, to take advantage of the age of Kali, right? To take advantage, progress spiritually. So the Lord gave them a chance to take their births in the families of pious Brahmanas so that they could, progress in spiritual life. The demons, however, they became proud of taking birth as Brahmanas, and they misused the opportunity, right? And so it didn't end very well, but it led to the movement of Lord Chaitanya. So still it was according to the plan. So Shringi himself, now after cursing Parikshit Maharaja, he felt that he had made a mistake, and thus he went back to his father and he started to cry. And of course, this broke the meditation of the sage. And then coming to his external senses, the sage noticed this snake around his neck, but he didn't give importance to it. He just threw it away, and that's all. So the whole incident of the whole incident with this snake, it was not very serious. So the sage failed to properly receive the king, and then Parikshit put the dead snake around the neck of the sage, and no, it would be inconsequential if it was not by the curse of the boy. So it was not a serious matter. It became serious because of this boy. So seeing his son crying, right, the sage asked if anyone had done him harm. What happened. And then when the child finally explained what happened, then the sage became, very, very sorry. He was saying that, alas, what a great sinful act was performed by my son. He has awarded heavy punishment for an insignificant offense, right? But, just because someone Parikshit put this snake around the sage, the boy cursed him to die. That's completely disproportional. So the sage then explained to the boy the consequence of his acts, right? And he described things that happen when monarchical regimes, right, conducted by saintly kings like Parikshit Maharaj, are abolished. And these are, of course, all symptoms that have become common, right, in your age. So one symptom is that the whole world becomes filled with chiefs and they harass the general population, right? So that's something we can observe. And then we have great social disruption due to the plundering of the people's wealth by rogues and thieves. People are killed and injured. Animals are stolen. Women kidnapped, right? People in general, they fall systematically from the path of a progressive civilization, right? Following the Varnashrama system. People become more attracted to economic development and sense gratification, and they adopt a hedonistic life. And this, of course, results in unwanted children, right? And Prabhupada describes them on the level of dogs and monkeys. So very serious matter. So in Kali Yuga, the degradation, they started with the Brahmanas becoming proud and demanding, respects and privileges based on their birth, right? Started with this caste system. And then as a result of that, the Kshatras, they rebelled against these degraded Brahmanas and started to rule independently from their advice. And then as a result, this headless Kshatriya class also became degraded, right? Adopting hedonistic lifestyle, living opulently due to the exploitation of the other classes, like the merchant class and the peasants, misusing the resources of the state for wars and vanity projects. And this degradation of the Kshatriyas led the merchants to rebel and establishing the capitalist system, right? Democratic government and so on. And they became greedy and they started exploiting the working class, right? Putting them to work. And this eventually led to the workers rebelling and implementing the communist system, right? And then, and communism is completely opposite. It's the diametric opposite of Varnashrama system. And it brings, the spread of atheism, that brings, great miseries. So that's how we see one class degrading after the other, right? Starting from the Brahmanas. And so we go from Vedic society, saintly king, everything perfect, all the way down to Soviet Union. This is the sequence of degradation of the class due to the abolition of Varnashrama. And lamenting, again and again, this unjust curse of such a saintly king, the Rishi prayed to the Lord, so his son could be excused, right? So this is verse 47. Then the Rishi prayed to the all-pervading personality of Godhead to pardon his immature boy, who had no intelligence, and who committed the great sin of cursing a person who was completely free from all sins, who was subordinate and who deserved to be protected, right? Unquote. So, different from Maharaj Parikshit, Shringi, he was not a pure devotee. He was not a soul surrendered to the Lord. He was proud, propense to anger. He was like a conditioned soul. So the Lord he used this tendency, right, to facilitate the pastimes, right? And then he inspired the father to pray for the son so he could be excused, right? So in his purport, Prabhupada mentions that all the foolish sons of Brahmanas are warned hereby to not become as foolish as Stringi and to be always on guard against the demoniac qualities by which they had in their previous births. The foolish boy was, of course, excused by the Lord, but others who may not have a father like Shamika Rishi will be put into great difficulty if they misuse the advantages obtained by birth in a Brahmana family, right? Quite heavy, right? Okay, so this is the end of the quote. And then we start chapter 19, the determination of Parikshit Maharaj, right? Haribol. So, while returning to his palace, Parikshit Maharaj, he lamented his offense to Shamika Rishi. He felt that he had committed an uncivilized and heinous act against the faultless and powerful Brahmana, right? So he was distressed. So Prabhupada mentions that the process of regretting sins committed in the past, as well as, because of weaknesses or accidents, is very important for devotees, because this repentance is like a fire that, by the grace of the Lord, burns these sins to ashes, right? By this repentance, a devotee is pardoned from these accidental sins. So Maharaj Parikshit, he started desiring that the reaction for this offense would come quickly, so he would become free from the sinful reaction. And then there is a quote here. King Parikshit thought, due to my neglecting the injunctions of the Supreme Lord, I must certainly expect some difficulty to overcome me in the near future. I now desire, without reservation, that the calamity come now, for in this way I may be freed of the sinful action and not commit such an offense again. I am uncivilized and sinful due to my neglect of Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection. Therefore, I wish that my kingdom, strength, and riches burn up immediately by the fire of the Brahmana's wrath, so that in the future I may not be guided by such inauspicious attitudes. So this is the repentance of Maharaj Parikshit, right? This is verses 19, 2 and 3. So Maharaj Parikshit was thinking like that, and it didn't take long for him to receive the news of the curse of the Brahmana boy, because Shamika Rishi, he came personally to him, and he conveyed to him the news of the curse with great regret, right? So my dear king, I'm sorry, this happened. So Parikshit, he was going to die in 7 days, right? After being bitten by a winged snake, Takshaka. So, but surprisingly, Parikshit accepted it as good news, and he saw it as a blessing in disguise, because it would result in his ultimate renunciation of everything material. It would bring him back to Godhead, right? And Prabhupada mentions this in his purport, that, quote, Maharaj Parikshit was a great devotee of the Lord and a bona fide candidate for entering into the kingdom of God. But even though he was so, his material assets as the emperor of the world were setbacks to perfect attainment of his rightful status as one of the associates of the Lord in the spiritual sky, right? His opulence, his material opulence was an obstacle, was a problem. So as a devotee of the Lord, he could understand that the cursing of the Brahmana boy, although unwise, like unfair, and so on, was a blessing upon him, being the cause of detachment from worldly affairs, both political and social, right? So he took it as good news. Now I have an excuse to renounce everything and, go to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam from Sukadeva Goswami. Because, when you have only 7 days to live, there is no duty anymore. It's about, going back to Godhead. You say to everyone, I'm sorry, I'm going, now you live without me, right? What I could do, I did for you. Now I want to be free, to dedicate myself to devotional service in my last days. So after receiving the news, right, Parikshit, he immediately left the kingdom and he sat at the banks of the river, determined to concentrate his mind on the Lord, right, Jai, becoming fully Krishna conscious until the time of death. So although Prabhupada translates the Sanskrit Amrita Najam, like transcendental river, mentioned in the verse 5 as river Ganges, in verse 6, Prabhupada, he mentions that it was most probably not the Ganges, but the Yamuna, because it will not make sense for the king to travel a long distance to go to the Ganges in such a situation. It would be more logical that he would go to the Yamuna, that is close there. He was in Delhi, right? That was Hastinapura. He was in Delhi. Delhi is closer to the Yamuna than to the Ganges, right? The Ganges is to the north. It's far. So this version is confirmed by Srila Goswami. So, makes more sense that probably actually it was the Yamuna that he went. But anyway, doesn't make much difference. Both are sacred rivers. So, Maharaja Parikshit, he sat down firmly on the banks of the Ganges or the Yamuna to concentrate his mind in Krishna consciousness, rejecting all other practices of self-realization. Because transcendental loving service to Krishna is the greatest achievement, superseding all other methods. So the river by which the king sat to fast carries the most auspicious water, which is mixed with the dust. Sorry, I'll go where I am here on the quote. Which is mixed with the dust of the lotus feet of the Lord and tulasi leaves. Therefore, that water sanctifies the three worlds, inside and outside, and even sanctifies Lord Shiva and other demigods. Consequently, anyone who is destined to die must take shelter of this river, right? So, interesting, right? So, in the 17th chapter, so this was verses 5 and 6. So, in the 17th chapter, in the conversation between Parikshit and Dharma, the process of accepting not only pleasant things, but also reverses, right, as the mercy of Krishna is emphasized, right? We studied that. So, a devotee, he sees everything as connected with Krishna, right? Thus, even in the most, trying situations, even the most trying situations, they can help a devotee remember Krishna and become engaged in his service, right? And now we will see how Parikshit Maharaja, he applied this principle in his personal life after receiving the news of the curse, right? So we saw in theory, right? Now we will see in practice what he did with these instructions, practically in his life. So that is the combination of all material loss, right? Because one may lose money, may lose a car or a house or social reputation or, a limb or even a child, right? But that means losing all of these simultaneously, right? So that is a combination of all material loss. You just lose everything. So Parikshit, however, he received the news of this imminent death with happiness, because he understood that this was the arrangement of the Lord for bringing him home, right, back to Godhead. So instead of lamenting the loss, he prepared to spend the last days of his life absorbed in hearing the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Jai, free from all, administrative responsibilities. And everyone has to face that one day, right? Or will have to face. The problem is not how to avoid that, because this is impossible. Uh, the point is how to die in an auspicious circumstance where we can remember Krishna and go back to Godhead, right? Because our next destination is determined by how we live this world. So our next body may be material or spiritual, right? But in any case, it is achieved based on our consciousness at the time of death. It is a continuation of the current, flow of thoughts and desires inside the mind. So one who leaves his body while attached, to material things, lamenting, the loss of family, possessions, and so on, he attains another material body, right? And one who, like, he attains another material body where he can try again to satisfy these desires. However, one who leaves his body with his consciousness fixed on the Lord, he attains the spiritual planets. And there, of course, he can continue to serve the Lord like eternally. So, thanks to the curse of the Brahmana boy, Parikshit, he was able to pass away, like to leave his body in the most favorable circumstance, right? After having heard the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam, right? After becoming purified, focusing his thoughts on Krishna, and by his glorious example, we may also get the inspiration of how to deal with similar situations, with material laws and reverses, right? So, how can we be sure that we will be able to remember Krishna at the moment of death, right? That's an interesting question. And the best assurance that we can have is by remembering Krishna during our lives, because the thoughts at the time of death, they are just the result of our thoughts during our lifetime, right? During our life. So hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, right, and in special, especially hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, it plays an essential role on this, and brings us special blessings, right, to remember Krishna at the moment of death. And this is mentioned at the beginning of the 18th chapter, that this was so because those who have dedicated their lives to the transcendental topics of the personality of Godhead, of whom the Vedic hymns sing, and who are constantly engaged in remembering the lotus feet of the Lord, do not run the risk of having misconceptions, even at the last moment of their life. So see, this is a blessing, right? This is 18.4. Right? That if by studying Srimad Bhagavatam, we get this blessing of remembering Krishna at the time of death. And now, next topic. Maharaja Parikshit, he takes a firm vow. So, from the moment that he received, right, the notice of his imminent death, Parikshit, he decided to not eat, drink, or sleep. Right? In other words, he made a firm vow to not waste even 1 second more of his life in material activities. Now is 100% for Krishna, right? And from this point onwards, he decided to be fully Krishna conscious, abandoning all material attachments and any effort of maintaining his body, right? Because actually 7 days you can go even without water, it's possible. So Prabhupada mentions that when Maharaja Parikshit, he sat down on the bank of the Ganges, the news spread in all directions of the universe, and the great-minded sages who could follow the importance of the occasion all arrived there on the plea of a pilgrimage. Actually, they came to meet Maharaj Parikshit and not to take a bath. So all these great sages, they started appearing there. Oh, I came as peregrination. Oh, I also came. Oh, I also came. Everyone came. So many thousands of the sages by chance appear there in peregrination, right, in the same place. But of course, that was just an excuse. The point is that they wanted to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. They understood what was going to happen. So not only were the sages impressed with the determination of Maharaj Parikshit to abandon everything and just fast until death, but they also could foresee that the Srimad Bhagavatam was going to be spoken by Sukadeva Goswami, right? And apart from the great sages, even demigods and other kings appeared, right? All with the same excuse, right? All under the excuse of doing peregrination, right? Interesting. They all found the same excuse. But anyway, that was not, actually, they understood what was happening. That's why they appeared there all at the same time. So it's also interesting to note that the story of the death of Maharaj Parikshit is described in a completely different way in the Mahabharata. There, instead of going to the Ganges or Yamuna and fasting and so on, like described in the Bhagavata, it's described that Maharaj Parikshit, he took shelter in a protected palace built by his ministers, right, to try to escape from the snake. And Shiladeva Goswami, he explains that the Mahabharata, he describes the events of a different kalpa, and that's why it's different. So because Vyasadeva wrote the Mahabharata based on his yogic meditation before the events happened, before the death of Maharaj Parikshit. So actually he was seeing events from the past that happened in a different pastime, in a different era or a different universe, in an iteration of the pastime where the Srimad Bhagavatam was not spoken. And the Srimad Bhagavatam itself was written later by Vyasadeva, describing the factual events that happened 5,000 years ago, right? And of course, the Bhagavatam speaks from the perspective of pure devotional service to the Lord. So that's why in certain points, you have these apparent contradictions between Bhagavatam and Mahabharata, right? Because of this difference. Mahabharata is the pastime in some other that happened in some other era, some other time. And the Bhagavatam describes what exactly happened 5,000 years ago here in our planet. And in general, every time there are contradictions between like events narrated in different Puranas or different scriptures, it's safe to conclude that it's because say different sages, they narrate different iterations of the pastime, right? That happened in different kalpas, different universes. So in any case, from all scriptures, the Bhagavatam is the highest. So even if there is some contradiction, the information given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it should be taken as correct, the correct and precise version, because Bhagavatam, there is no mistake. Other books, anyway, usually it's because of they are describing different pastimes. But even if you believe that there is some contradiction, then you should take the version of the Bhagavatam. And then here the meeting with the sages. So here, this is verses 12 and 13. Quote, after all the rishis and others had seated themselves comfortably, the king, humbly standing before them with folded hands, told them of his decision of fast until death. The fortunate king said, indeed, we are the most grateful of all the kings who are trained to get favors from the great souls. Generally, you, sages, consider royalty as refused, to be rejected and left in a distant place, right? So usually sages, they don't associate with kings. So it was a great fortune to Parikshit that at the moment of his death, all these powerful sages were there. So Maharaj Parikshit, he valued the presence of the sages, right? Understanding that this was the special mercy of the Lord, right? Because usually such great sages, they don't associate with kings and others involved in worldly affairs. But these sages, they were anxious to associate with Maharaj Parikshit because of his spiritual stature and his firm vow. Right, so they came because they wanted to associate with Parikshit, and he also humbly submitted to them his decision of fasting until death, as Prabhupada mentions. Right, quote from Prabhupada: "Any important decision, whoever firmly fixed, should be confirmed by some authority. That makes the matter perfect." Unquote. So the point is that no matter how correct a decision may appear to be, the principle is that we should confirm it with some authority, because such authorities, they are representatives of Krishna. And thus, by presenting the matter to them, we give Krishna a chance to intervene in case necessary, right? Although Krishna is inside our hearts as Paramatma, we often can't hear him because of our material contaminations, the mind, and so on. So by consulting, different authorities, different spiritual authorities, we give Krishna the chance to speak to us in a form that we may be able to hear, right? So if there is something wrong with the decision, Krishna has a chance of speaking to us and telling us that no, that's not a good idea. So now big long quote, verses 19, 17 to 21. In perfect self-control, Maharaja Parikshit sat down on a seat of straw, with straw roots facing the east, placed on the southern bank of the Ganges, and he himself faced the north. Just previously, he had given charge of his kingdom over to his son. Thus, the king, Maharaj Parikshit, sat to fast until death. All the demigods of the higher planets praised the king's actions, and in pleasure constantly scattered flowers over the arts and beat celestial drums. All the great sages who were assembled there also praised the decision of Maharaja Parikshit, and they expressed their approval by saying, "Very good." So naturally, the sages are inclined to do good to common men, for they have all the qualitative powers of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, they were very much pleased to see Maharaja Parikshit, a devotee of the Lord, and they spoke as follows. The sages said, "O chief of all the saintly kings of the Pandu dynasty, who are strictly in the line of Lord Sri Krishna, it is not at all astonishing that you give up your throne, which is decorated with the helmets of many kings, to achieve eternal association with the personality of Godhead. We shall all wait here until the foremost devotee of the Lord, Maharaja Parikshit, returns to the supreme planet, which is completely free from all mundane contamination and all kinds of lamentation." Unquote. So, after welcoming the sages and receiving their blessings, Parikshit, he inquired from them about two questions. One, what is the duty of everyone in all circumstances, and what is the so that's one. And the second question is, what is the specific duty of one who is about to die, right? So two questions again. One, what is the duty of everyone in all circumstances, like in normal circumstances? Two, what is the specific duty of someone who is going to die soon? And he specifically adds the word Suda, or perfectly correct, because he wanted to urge the sages to give him the ultimate process, right? And not just Hare Krishna, and not just any process, right? He wanted the supreme process. He didn't want the sages to make him lose time, right? He didn't want to lose time with lower processes of self-realization. He wanted the ultimate process. So we may think that Parikshit, he had a very short span of life ahead, not just 7 days, right? But Prabhupada mentions that in reality, everyone is a dying man, right? Because everyone has a very limited life ahead. And in fact, we are in a worse position than Maharaja Parikshit, because he was sure that he had 7 days to live. But we can't be sure that we are going to live 7 days, right? We can die at any moment, right? So therefore, the question posed by Maharaja Parikshit is the most relevant question, actually, for all of us. And the Srimad Bhagavatam itself is the answer for this question, right? How can I prepare for imminent death? So the sages, however, had different opinions, right? They were from different lines, different schools, and they couldn't agree on a single answer. So Sridhara Swami, he comments that some recommended the king to give charity, others for him to practice meditation, others for him to perform sacrifices or perform austerities and so on, right? So they had different opinions. And this paved the way to the appearance of Sukadeva Goswami, Jai, and who was the person qualified to give the ultimate answer. And now we come to the final topic for today, that is the appearance of Sukadeva Goswami, Jai. So this is narrated on 119:25 to 28. So, quote, at that moment, there appeared the powerful son of Vyasadeva, who traveled over the earth, disinterested and satisfied with himself. He did not manifest any symptoms of belonging to any social order or status of life. He was surrounded with women and children, and he dressed as if others had neglected him. This son of Vyasadeva was only 16 years old. His legs, hands, thighs, arms, shoulders, forehead, and the other parts of his body were all delicately formed. His eyes were beautifully white, and his nose and ears were highly raised. He had a very attractive face, and his neck was well formed and beautiful like a conch shell. His collarbone was fleshy, his chest broad and thick, his navel deep, and his abdomen beautifully striped. His arms were long, and curly hair was strewn over his beautiful face. He was naked, and the hue of his body reflected that of Lord Krishna. He was blackish and very beautiful due to his youth. Because of the glamour of his body and his attractive smiles, he was pleasing to women. Though he tried to cover his natural glories, the great sages present there were all experts in the art of physiognomy, and so they honored him by raising from their seats. Right? Jai, very beautiful verse, right? So, explaining this passage. So Sukadeva Goswami, he had never accepted a formal spiritual master. He was never initiated because he ran away from Vyasadeva as soon as he took birth. And then he came back just briefly, just to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, right? And then he ran away again. So Prabhupada mentions that the formal process, like starting with initiation, it is intended to gradually elevate one to the stage of liberation, right? But Sukadeva Goswami, he didn't need it because he was already liberated from birth. So not only was he self-realized, but completely aloof from social customs, right? So although he looked like a young man, he was naked, and he was surrounded by many women and children who were following him out of curiosity, right? He was like a prophet for them or something. So materially speaking, there was no way to recognize him as being part of any specific social class. There was no signs, right? Much less of being such an elevated soul. But the sages present there, they were able to understand who he was just by studying his physical features. Because the gross body, it's created in the womb around the subtle body, just like a piece of cloth, right? In this way, by studying certain features of the physical body and facial expressions, it's possible to understand the consciousness of a person. So this is a Vedic art, actually, which the sages, they understood, right? They knew how to use. And therefore, they were able to recognize Sukadeva Goswami, and unanimously, they agreed to hear from him, right? So they all offered him respect, by raising from their seats, and Maharaj Parikshit, he bowed down his head. And at this moment, all these women and children who were following, who were following Sukadeva Goswami, they left. They understood, oh, something serious is happening here. So they became scared and they left. And they went away. And the atmosphere became, very grave. and filled with anticipation, right? So, okay, reading here 2 verses, 30 and 31. Quote, Sukadeva Goswami was then surrounded by saintly sages and demigods, just as the moon is surrounded by stars, planets, and other heavenly bodies. His presence was gorgeous, and he was respected by all. The sage Sri Sukadeva Goswami sat perfectly pacified, intelligent, and ready to answer any questions without hesitation. The great devotee Maharaj Parikshit approached him, offered his respects by bowing before him, and politely inquired with sweet words and folded hands. Right, Jai. So, the point here is that when both the spiritual master and the disciple they are qualified, the most elevated spiritual discussions they can take place, and of course that was the case with Parikshit Maharaja and Sukadeva Goswami, right? They were the most auspicious combination, and this led to the descending of the most auspicious scripture, right? The Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada mentions this on his purport to verse 31. So he says that both the spiritual master and the disciple, namely Sri Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaja Parikshit, attained perfection through the medium of Srimad Bhagavatam. Sukadeva Goswami learned Srimad Bhagavatam from his father, Vyasadeva, but he had no chance to recite it. Before before Maharaj Parikshit, he recited Srimad Bhagavatam and answered the questions of Maharaj Parikshit unhesitantly, right, without hesitation. And thus, both the master and the disciple got salvation. So so this is the quote, right? So before renouncing his kingdom, Parikshit Maharaja, he was engaged in the performance of duties and material auspicious activities, right? He was acting like a king. And this, of course, is generally recommended for householders. But by now, right, having renounced all these responsibilities of royal life, he was ready to hear the highest knowledge, right? So the Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana because it deals only with devotional service. It doesn't speak about anything else. And this was possible only because both the speaker and the hearer, they were fully in the liberated platform, right? Nor Sukadeva Goswami nor Parikshit Maharaja, they were interested in material things. Therefore, the conversation was focused only on Krishna, right? So simply by our remembering you, our houses became instantly sanctified. And what we speak of seeing you, touching you, washing your holy feet, and offering you a seat in your home, right? This is a quote. Just as the atheist cannot remain in the presence of the personality of Godhead, so also the invulnerable sins of a man are immediately vanquished in your presence. O saints, O great mystic. Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is very dear to the sons of King Pandu, has accepted me as one of those relatives just to please his great cousins and brothers. Otherwise, without being inspired by Lord Krishna, how is that you have voluntarily appeared here though you are moving incognito to the common man and are not visible to us who are on the verge of death, right? And then there is more. You are the spiritual master of great saints and devotees. I am therefore begging you to show the way of perfection for all persons, and especially for one who is about to die. Please let me know what a man should hear, chant, remember, and worship, and also what he should not do. Please explain all this to me, right? So this is Maharaj Parikshit inquiring from Sukadeva Goswami. So with this, the scenario for the recitation of the Srimad Bhagavatam is complete, right? Now Sukadeva Goswami is going to start speaking. So in the first verses of the second canto, Sukadeva Goswami will begin his reply, right? Jai. So this is the end of the first canto. And okay, just to finish for today, I prepared some bonus for you today. So this is a timeline of recent and future events that are described here in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Most of these are described in the first canto, but no, but I'm combining with some things that are mentioned in the other cantos, so you can, have like a chronological, like you can have this chronologically, right? You can understand the order that all of this happened, because when you just read Srimad Bhagavatam, it's not very clear the order. You become confused because the Bhagavatam is organized by topics, by spiritual topics, by similarity of topics, and not and also by this natural progression, right, of to the most advanced, and not chronologically. So we reach Srimad Bhagavatam, we become confused about the chronology. So I'm giving you the chronology here so you can, satisfy your curiosity, right? So okay, so if you don't know these facts, it's not going to mean much for you, right? But the facts that you know, you can, put in order inside of your mind, and you can, okay, that was this, and then this, and then this, and then this. Okay, so let's start the chronology here in order, in chronological order. So Vyasadeva writes the Vedas, right? And he restored the Vedas after they were almost lost during Dwapara Yuga. And then his disciples spread the knowledge of the different branches to their disciples. And this is mentioned in first canto and also in the 12th canto. And then we have the appearance of Krishna, Jai, that's 10th canto. Then Krishna executes his childhood's pastimes, he kills Kansa, right? That's also 10th canto. And then while living in Mathura, Krishna fights Jarasandha 21 times. He protects the Yadus from the repeated attacks of Jarasandha by creating the city of Dwarka in the middle of the ocean, right? That's also 10th canto. And then Yudhishthira becomes the king, and he executes several great sacrifices, right? That's first canto. Then the Pandavas, they lose everything in the dice game and are forced to go into exile, right? That's Mahabharata. Then Krishna meets with Vyasadeva and blesses Sukadeva Goswami inside the womb that he will never be captured by the material energy. Before that, Sukadeva Goswami, he didn't want to take birth. After that only that he takes birth. And then the Pandavas return, and there is actually another thing that was before here. Actually, there is a small mistake here, because after Krishna bless Vyasadeva, then is the birth of Sukadeva Goswami, and then he runs from home, and later he hears the Srimad Bhagavatam from Vyasadeva, right? That's first canto. So Krishna met with Vyasadeva, then Sukadeva Goswami takes birth, and then the Pandavas, they no, actually here is correct, right? Krishna meets with Vyasadeva, then the birth of Sukadeva Goswami, then the Pandavas return and demand their kingdom back, as previously agreed, right? But then Duryodhana refuses, and that's Mahabharata. Then, at this point, Vidura leaves the palace and goes on a pilgrimage after being assaulted by Duryodhana. That's narrated on the first canto and also on the Mahabharata. Then we have dissension between the Kurus and the Pandavas, right? They prepare for war. And at this point, Balarama goes on a pilgrimage for 1 year. That's 10th canto. And then, next slide. Then Balarama kills Romaharshana, and he blesses Sukadeva Goswami to recite the Puranas. This is 10th canto, but we studied this in one of the first meetings, right? That's how Suta Goswami was empowered to become the speaker of the Puranas. And then after this, Krishna speaks the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, the battle of Kurukshetra starts, and then after 18 days, the battle finishes and the Pandavas win, right? Jai. And then that's what we studied here in the first canto. Aswatthama tries to kill Parikshit in the womb and is cursed by Krishna, right? That's first canto. Then the birth of Maharaja Parikshit, prayers of Queen Kunti, that was also first canto. Yudhishthira becomes the king, right? First canto also. Bhishmadeva passes away in the presence of Krishna after instructing King Yudhishthira. Then after establishing the Pandavas as the rulers, Krishna departs for Dwarka, right? He leaves, right? That's also first canto. We studied that. And then, right. Okay. So then the Yadus, they fight between themselves and the dynasty is destroyed, right? And this happens 36 years after the battle of Kurukshetra, following the curse of Gandhari. So this is 11th canto, and it's mentioned there. But it's mentioned on the first canto also, just not with the date. Then Krishna instructs Uddhava and Maitreya, and he orders Uddhava to remain on the planet after his departure to bring a message to the sages in Badalikashrama and give them association. Right, that's 11th canto. And then finally, the disappearance of Lord Krishna. The disappearance of Lord Krishna, right after being hit by the arrow of the hunter, and that's 11th canto. And then Vidura meets Uddhava when he was on the way. Uddhava tells him to get instructions from Maitreya, who is nearby. This is third canto. We will study this. And then a conversation between Vidura and Maitreya, that's third and fourth cantos. And then back to first canto, Vidura returns to the palace and preaches to Dhritarashtra, right? This we studied. He wants to save Dhritarashtra from being a Grihamedi. He wants to bring Dhritarashtra back to Godhead. But Dhritarashtra goes only halfway. He goes only to the Brahma Jyoti. And then, so Vidura preaches to Dhritarashtra, then Dhritarashtra attains impersonal liberation, and Vidura goes again on pilgrimage, right? This is all things that we studied here on the first canto. Then Arjuna goes to Dwarka and finds that Krishna has already left, right? And then Arjuna escorts the wives of Krishna, and on the way he is defeated by the cowherds who kidnapped the wives of Krishna. This we studied already. Then Arjuna returns to the palace and describes everything to King Yudhishthira, right? The Pandavas, they accept the renounced order of life. They leave the palace, go to the Himalayas. Then Parikshit becomes the king. And then Parikshit meets Kali, Dharma, and Bhumi, right? In the form of the Shudra, the bull, and the cow that we studied. Then Parikshit is cursed by Sringi, the Brahmana boy. That's today already. And then Parikshit abandons the kingdom, right? Goes to the banks of the Ganges or Yamuna, prepares to fast until death, surrounded by the great sages. Sukadeva Goswami, he appears in the assembly and, right, requested by Maharaj Parikshit, he recites Srimad Bhagavatam, right? And Sutta Goswami is present there. He hears from the assembly. He is there when Sukadeva Goswami is narrating. Then later, after Bhagavatam is narrated, Parikshit, he narrates the Brihad Bhagavatamrita to his mother. That's another book called Brihad Bhagavatamrita. It was spoken by Parikshit after he heard the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then finally, Parikshit is beaten by the snake and passes away, right? That's 12th canto. And then after that, Kali Yuga starts in force. Chronologically, Kali Yuga started before, but because of the presence of Krishna and later because of the presence of Maharaj Parikshit, Kali Yuga was being delayed. But now, finally, Kali Yuga starts. And then Janamejaya, he becomes the king, right? He's the son of Parikshit Maharaj, and he performs the sacrifice to kill all the snakes of the world, to revenge his father. That's 12th canto. And then Sutta Goswami narrates the Srimad Bhagavatam to the sages in Naimisharanya, right? That's the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, like first canto. But you see that actually is later in the chronology, it's almost at the end, right? And then we have the different dynasties of kings that are described in the 12th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, all the dynasties of Kali Yuga. And then fall of Vedic culture, right? People use the Vedas as an excuse to kill animals, right? Degradation of Vedic culture. And then 2,500 years ago, Lord Buddha comes to preach ahimsa, right? He rejects the Vedas in the process. So that was only like already close to our time. And then Sankaracharya, he revives the study of the Vedas by preaching a form of Buddhism, right, based on Vedic literature. And then he brings the Vedas back. Then Madhvacharya restore the proper theistic conclusion of the Vedas, right? And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appears in the Madhava Sampradaya to give the ultimate conclusion of the Vedas, like in the form of the Sankirtan movement. And then we have a succession of different Vaishnavacharyas, culminating with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, and then Srila Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada comes to the West, writes his books, starts our society, right? And we are here, right? Haribol, we are here. And then about 5,000 years later, right, from today, in the future, Golden Age will reach its peak. And then at this point, everyone in the planet will be a devotee. That's 5,000 years from now. And then after this point, there is a gradual decline. And then after 10,000 years, 10,000 years after Mahaprabhu, the last pure Vaishnavas, they go back to Godhead. And then there is just, the remaining years of Kali Yuga, right? Just degradation. And then after 417,000 more, Kalki comes to destroy the 80s, and then after a transition of 1,000 years, a new Satya Yuga begins, and that's 12th canto. And then some extra notes. So Krishna's disappearance happened in his 125th birth on our planet, right? So it was a total of 36 years after the Battle of Kurukshetra. And at this time, Parikshit Maharaja, he was about 35 years old, maybe 35, maybe 36. The Pandavas, they renounced their kingdom and they went to the Himalayas after receiving the news of the departure of Krishna and the Yadu dynasty, right? So they received the news a few weeks or maybe months after the departure of Krishna. And by the time that Parikshit was cursed, so by the time that Parikshit was cursed, he had an adult son, right, Janamejaya. So this must have happened several years after the Pandavas left, right, the cursing of Maharaj Parikshit. So Sukadeva Goswami, as well as Vyasadeva, they were present when Bhishmadeva was leaving his body. Therefore, Sukadeva Goswami is older than Parikshit. When Parikshit was going to be born, Sukadeva Goswami, when Parikshit was born, Sukadeva Goswami, he was, a grown up already. So, but then we remember that on verse 1926, it's described that Tan Dwasta San, that Sukadeva Goswami was only 16 years old, right? These are the words there when he met Parikshit Maharaj. But this appears to be to refer to his appearance, not to chronological age. Because he was so pure, he had the appearance of a 16-year-old boy, just like Krishna also has the appearance of a 16-year-old boy, right? 16-year-old boy when he spoke the Srimad Bhagavatam. So Sutta Goswami, he was 5 years old when Balarama killed Romaharshana. So during the time of the battle of Kurukshetra, Sutta Goswami, he was 5 years old, right? And Sutta Goswami was thus 5 or 6 years older than Maharaja Parikshit, right? So he was present when Sukadeva Goswami narrated the Bhagavatam to Parikshit, and later he narrated the same Bhagavatam to the sages in the forest of Naimisharanya, right? So okay, so this is it for today. Today was a little bit long meeting, but I hope it was interesting, right?